they ended it. Or maybe they pulled away so slowly, it was like watching the tide disappear. And now you're left wondering, do they even care? Are they hurting at all? Or did I mean nothing to them? If you're asking those questions, you're not alone. Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and in this video, we're going to talk about something that most people don't see, but you need to understand if you've ever loved someone with an avoidant attachment style. How avoidants process breakups, and the 5 subtle signs that they're hurting even if they'll never admit it. Avoidants are masters of emotional self-protection. After a breakup, they often look cold, detached, even relieved. It can feel like you were the only one grieving, while they seem totally fine. But here's the truth. Their pain doesn't always show up the way yours does. They suppress, they distract, they cope by creating distance from their own feelings and from you. But if you know what to look for, there are clear indicators that they're not over it. They're just not wired to show it in obvious ways. In this video, I'll walk you through 5 psychological patterns avoidants often display when they're hurting but trying to hide it. And number 3, it's so subtle that most people miss it entirely. So, if you've ever found yourself stuck between heartbreak and confusion, if you're wondering whether they ever felt what you did, this video will give you insight, closure, and peace of mind. Hit subscribe if you're ready to stop obsessing over their silence and start understanding what their behavior is really saying beneath the surface. Let's get into it. 5 signs an avoidant is hurting after the breakup, but just won't tell you. Let's start with something that often gets misunderstood. When an avoidant pulls away even more after a breakup, it's not always because they've moved on. In fact, it can be the exact opposite. One of the first and most confusing signs that an avoidant is hurting is that they disappear, fully, not gradually, not gently, but suddenly and completely. And to the person on the receiving end, it can feel cold, heartless, and final. But emotionally, that kind of dramatic withdrawal is often a coping mechanism, not indifference. See, avoidants are wired to manage pain by cutting themselves off from anything that stirs it up. So when the breakup hits, their first instinct isn't to cry on someone's shoulder or process the grief out loud. Their instinct is to shut down, go silent, and eliminate the emotional trigger. That often means blocking you on social media, deleting your number, or refusing any contact, even if the breakup ended on relatively civil terms. This isn't about punishing you. It's about emotional self-preservation. It's their way of trying to get control over feelings they don't know how to sit with. Now here's the distinction. If someone truly doesn't care, they don't need to hide from you. They don't need to block you or avoid your presence. They can be polite, even indifferent, but when an avoidant is in pain, that pain doesn't look like tears. It looks like distance, sudden, sharp, and sometimes confusing. And that distance is often the clearest sign they're not okay. So no, don't take the silence at face value. Often it's not a sign that they feel nothing. It's a sign that they feel too much. And they're doing everything they can to avoid falling apart. Withdrawal isn't always about detachment. Sometimes it's about overwhelm. And understanding that difference, that's where your clarity begins. The second sign that an avoidant is hurting, though they may never say it out loud, is a sudden, intense shift in their behavior. If you start noticing that they're throwing themselves headfirst into distractions, working long hours, obsessively committing to hobbies, hitting the gym twice a day, or making sure they're out with friends every night, that change in pace isn't just about moving on. It can often be a form of emotional avoidance. This isn't about healthy self-care or natural changes after a breakup. It's about emotional overcompensation. See, for avoidance, sitting still often brings emotions too close to the surface, so instead they go into overdrive. They flood their schedule, they fill every quiet moment, because in those silent spaces, the feelings creep in, and that's exactly what they want to avoid. So they distract, They chase productivity or stimulation not because they've healed, but because they don't know how to process pain without burying it beneath motion. It might even look admirable from the outside. People might say, "Wow, they're doing great, keeping busy, focused, pushing forward," but often it's not true regulation. It's emotional numbing dressed up as discipline. That constant motion isn't always healing. It's hiding. It's a survival tactic. The avoidant doesn't usually reach for support when they're hurting. They reach for structure, control, and distance. And this over-involvement in anything and everything, that's their armor, their way of saying, if I keep moving, I won't have to feel this. So if you've seen this kind of shift in someone after a breakup, don't be fooled into thinking it means they're unaffected. That sudden intensity in their schedule is often a response to pain, not proof of peace. Sometimes the loudest signal that someone's struggling is how hard they try to appear like they're not. And for the avoidant, pain often hides behind achievement, distraction, and doing more than they can feel. Understanding that helps you stop misreading the noise as healing and start seeing it for what it really is: avoidance in motion. The third sign that an avoidant is still hurting after the breakup, but won't say it out loud, is how they respond to you if they're still in contact. What you'll often notice isn't emotional openness or warmth, it's distance. A kind of flat, cold tone that feels more like a wall than a bridge. Maybe they reply to your messages, but it's clipped. One-word answers, no real engagement. Or worse, there's edge to their tone. Something slightly sharp, sarcastic, or passively dismissive. And while it might feel like anger on the surface, it's often something else underneath. Defensiveness. Avoidants struggle deeply with vulnerability. After a breakup, rather than admitting pain, they armor up emotionally. They'd rather come off distant or even cold than risk revealing just how affected they actually are. So what you're seeing in those flat, withdrawn, or subtly biting messages isn't indifference. It's self-protection. It's a way of saying, I'm not going to let you see that this still hurts. And this behavior often shows up as passive aggressiveness. They may not say, I miss you, but their words might carry a sting, a vague jab, a cold remark disguised as a casual comment. It's not the kind of emotional expression that invites closeness. It's the kind that keeps you at arm's length. But ironically, that resistance to connection is often the clearest sign they still feel something. Contrast this with someone who's truly moved on. A person who's reached emotional neutrality will typically respond politely, maybe even kindly, but without much investment. They don't avoid your messages, but they don't dig into them either. There's a calmness there. No charge, no sting, just a steady sense of this is done. That kind of neutrality shows up when emotions have settled. But when someone is unusually cold or subtly hostile, it usually means they're still emotionally impacted. So if your avoidant ex seems uncharacteristically detached or strangely reactive, it may not be about you at all. It's often about what they're trying not to feel. And understanding that can keep you from personalizing behavior that's really more about their internal struggle than your worth. The fourth sign that an avoidant may still be emotionally impacted, though they'll rarely admit it, is when they quietly keep tabs on you online. It might be subtle. Maybe they've unfollowed you or stopped interacting with your posts, but somehow they still end up viewing your stories, or their name pops up in a place you didn't expect, lurking through a mutual friend's post, or just showing up in a way that feels oddly It's not always direct, but it's there. This passive, quiet presence that lets you know they haven't fully disconnected, even if they're trying to appear like they have. Avoidants don't often cut emotional cords cleanly, even if they look like they have. While they may go out of their way to create space or appear indifferent, they still wrestle with curiosity, nostalgia, and at times loneliness. But instead of reaching out in a way that feels vulnerable or exposed, they opt for distance, with just enough visibility to feel in the loop. That's how they manage the discomfort of missing you without having to admit to them. Checking your social media isn't necessarily about reconnecting. It's a form of emotional regulation, just enough contact with your world to calm their curiosity, but not enough to feel emotionally exposed. They don't want to initiate, they don't want to be seen trying, so instead they hover from a distance. They glance without engaging. It's not a call to reconnect, it's a way to feel something without risking anything. And it's important to say this clearly: just because someone is watching from afar doesn't mean they're ready to return, or even capable of doing the inner work required to show up differently. There's a gap between missing you and being able to be with you in a meaningful, emotionally safe way. Presence does not always equal readiness. So while this behavior can absolutely mean they're still emotionally stirred, it's not a reliable indicator that they're prepared to rebuild anything. What it does mean is they haven't fully let go. And understanding that can help you validate your own experience without jumping to conclusions that could set you up for more confusion. Here's something most people don't realize. When an avoidant is still emotionally affected after a breakup, they'll often try to stay connected, not directly, but indirectly. They're not the ones to send late-night "I miss you" texts or reach out with vulnerable honesty. That kind of emotional exposure feels far too risky. Instead, they do something much more subtle. They ask about you through mutual friends. They stay close to people who are still in your orbit. They may not say your name out loud, but you'll feel their presence in the background. You might notice they haven't completely severed ties with your circle. Maybe they randomly message an old mutual friend. Maybe they pop up in group chats or keep showing up at events where they know someone close to you will be. It's not a coincidence. It's their way of checking in without having to check in. For them, this is a low-risk way to stay informed while protecting themselves from rejection or vulnerability. And here's the important distinction. These behaviors often don't mean they're ready to rekindle anything. Just because someone is curious or even nostalgic doesn't mean they're capable of showing up differently in a relationship. They may miss you deeply, but missing someone and being willing to do the work to reconnect in a healthy, meaningful way are two very different things. This is where emotional clarity matters most. Because it's easy to mistake a passive sign of interest for genuine readiness, but if someone hasn't initiated honest communication, taken responsibility, or made clear efforts to grow, then those subtle signals are just that, signals, not invitations. So here's what you really want to look for. Has anything actually changed? Are they demonstrating growth, self-awareness, or a desire to repair? Not just by words, but through actions. Have they started therapy? Are they reading, reflecting, healing, learning? Are they actively exploring how they contributed to the disconnect and how they could show up better now? If you do reconnect, the real green flags are in what they're doing differently. Clear communication, emotional availability, a willingness to talk openly about what went wrong and how to move forward. If those things are present, that's a very different conversation. But if they're not, and you're just picking up breadcrumbs through friends or seeing little signs online, it might mean they still care, but not enough to meet you in the middle. And that's not cruel. That's just clarity. These signs aren't red flags, but they're not green flags either. They're neutral. They show someone is still emotionally tethered, but not necessarily ready. And knowing the difference is how you stay grounded in your worth and don't get pulled back into old patterns that never work. At the end of the day, just because someone doesn't say they're hurting after a breakup doesn't mean they're not feeling it. Avoidantly attached people often grieve in silence, behind distractions, distance, or indirect signals. They may still care, they may still miss you, but unless they're doing the inner work to heal and reconnect with emotional clarity, those signals alone aren't enough to build something healthy again. What matters most is not whether they remember you, but whether they're capable of showing up differently if the door ever reopens. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time here. I hope this helped you feel more grounded, less confused, and more empowered to protect your peace, even in the face of mixed signals. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what stood out most to you. Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if you want more content on secure relationships, emotional healing, and how to break free from confusing dynamics, hit that subscribe button so we can keep growing together. Until next time, choose your peace over potential, your clarity over chaos, and your self-worth over guessing games.